At the end of our last chapter, England stood in a strange place. A king had risen. A throne had been claimed by Edward IV, and after years of bloodshed, it looked like the war might finally be over.
But beneath that surface, something wasn't right. Because in a kingdom where power had been taken by force, no victory was ever truly secure. And soon, that truth would reveal itself in the most unsettling way imaginable.
Hello everyone, I'm Jason, and we are happy you joined us.
And I'm Jane, and we'd like to welcome you to Willis Through Time.
Are you with me?
2 young princes, heirs to the throne, would be placed inside the Tower of London. At first, it seemed like it was simply for protection, but over time, they were seen less and heard less.
Until one day they were simply gone, and with them went the last clear line between loyalty and ambition. Today, we're stepping into one of the most mysterious and debated moments in English history, and the event that would finally bring the War of Roses to its end. This is not just a story about disappearance. It's a story about power, about timing, and about what happens when the crown becomes more important than the people who are meant to inherit it.
By this point, England had already endured decades of instability. The War of the Roses was never just a battle between 2 families. It was a slow unraveling of trust between the most powerful people in the kingdom. Nobles no longer believed in stability. Alliances were temporary, and loyalty was often tied more to opportunity than to honor. So when Edward IV died in 1483, it didn't just create a vacancy on the throne. It created a moment where everyone understood that whoever moved first might control the future of England.
Edward IV's death came suddenly and without warning. His son, Edward V, was next in line, but he was only 12 years old. Too young to rule, too young to command loyalty, and far too young to defend himself against the kind of political maneuvering that had already defined the war. In situations like this, England followed a familiar pattern. A protector would be named, someone to guide the young king, to maintain order, and to ensure a smooth transition of power. That responsibility fell to Richard, Duke of Gloucester, brother to the late king, a man with experience, reputation, and just enough distance from the throne to be trusted.
And at first, that trust made sense. Richard had proven himself in battle. He had remained loyal during some of the most uncertain years of the war, and unlike many others, he hadn't openly reached for the crown. But history has a way of reminding us that proximity to power changes people.
Because once you are close enough to the throne, close enough to influence it, close enough to control who sits on it, the question is no longer who should rule. The question becomes, why not me?
Gentlemen, we are the War Council.
Richard moves quickly. Edward V is escorted towards London, but along the way, his control begins to slip. Key allies are arrested. Influence is removed, and before long, the young king is no longer surrounded by those who protected him, but by those who controlled him. His younger brother is brought to join him, and together they are placed inside the Tower of London, not as prisoners, at least not officially, but as something far more dangerous, obstacles.
At first, they were seen walking the grounds, appearing at windows, reminders that the rightful heirs were still there. But slowly, that changed. There were fewer sightings, fewer witnesses, and the public began to notice. They began to wonder, and finally, to ask questions. And then, suddenly they were gone. No announcement, no explanation, no confirmation of what had happened or why. Only silence. And in that silence, something far more powerful than proof began to take hold. Suspicion.
Not long after, Richard makes his move. The princes are declared illegitimate, and with that, the path to the throne is clear. Richard is crowned King Richard III, but even as the crown is placed upon his head, something about this moment feels different. Not triumphant, not decisive. It felt uncertain because a crown taken under suspicion is never truly secure.
I think it's important to remember, across England, people were watching. Not just the nobles, but those who had lived through years of war. And these people who had seen loyalties shift and promises broken, these are people who understood that something about this felt unfinished, because even if Richard had taken to the throne, there was still those who believed it didn't belong to him.
This was the time that someone began to rise. From across the sea, a new challenger begins to emerge, and that is Henry Tudor. No one can argue his claim to the throne was distant, but his timing was absolutely perfect. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the most obvious choice.
This was seen as a possible chance to end the cycle. And for many, that was enough.
In 1485, these two paths collide as two powers rose their troops. Richard III, the king, Henry Tudor, the challenger. Here at Bosworth Field, the future of England would be decided. The battle is chaotic, uncertain, and for a time, it could go either way.
But in the end, Richard falls. Not in retreat, not in surrender, but in battle. The last king of England is dead.
Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII, and with one decision, he accomplishes what decades of war could not. He then marries Elizabeth of York, the Red Rose and the White Rose, brought together and united, not through conquest, but through union. And just like that, the War of the Roses comes to an end.
But not everything was resolved, because the princes were never found. No clear answer, no final truth. Their disappearance didn't just remove two heirs. It removed certainty, and a kingdom built on lineage. That kind of uncertainty doesn't fade.
And from that uncertainty, a new dynasty begins, the Tudors.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Jane, and next time we step into a new chapter, a new dynasty, the Tudors.
And I'm Jason. Thank you for spending time with us, and we're excited to do it all over again. We'll see you next week in the past.